Hi, and welcome to Dani After Dark. If you're new here, make sure to like and subscribe so you don't miss a notification or a new episode. Tonight is the April Book Club book review. In this month, it was voted to do Weird Scenes Inside the Canyon, Laurel Canyon, Cover-Ups, and the Dark Art of the Hippie Dream by David McGowan. So I do have a link down in the chat, and I have pinned it if anybody wants to come on camera to do the review. If you do come on camera, you don't have to physically be on camera and be seen to everybody. Just show yourself to me backstage so I can see that you're not a troll and I will bring you up. But if you want to follow along in the chat, please do so. And if you haven't read this book, still please be in the chat and, contribute to this. And as we're talking about it, let us know your thoughts on the book. So we do have Zach Kopp here to discuss the book. So I will go ahead and bring Zach on. And he was the one that recommended this book. So hi, Zach. How are you?
I'm really well. I just got back from a crazy road trip about 10 minutes ago. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not championing this book. I'm not staunchly advocating it. I just think it's an interesting book.
Oh, no, totally cool. Totally cool. I mean, you recommended it and people voted for it. And yeah, it was the winning vote for this month. So yeah, there's a lot to it.
It's got Rodney Alcala. It's got everything.
Mm-hmm. It does. Yes, I do have Rodney Alcala as part of my notes for this. Mm-hmm. Paul from the Paulcast wasn't able to make it to be on, but I do have his notes because when we do our Manson Saga discussion panel over on his channel, this was a Manson book that he had read a while ago. So he had some notes from that. So I had him send that to me. Dani, read my statement. Paul, calm down. I will read it. So yeah, Paul, go up. Yeah, he's going to make me do the dirty work and read his. Yeah, that's what it is. But anyway, so I do have typed out what the back of the book says. So just so we can read that. So if anybody's unfamiliar with
it's covert, not cover. Covert.
Oh my God, you're right. Thank you for correcting me. What did I say?
You said cover-ups. I thought it might have just been a slip of the tongue.
Cover-ups. You are absolutely right. Thank you for correcting me. I'm not ever wrong.
I know.
I think this is the first time I've ever been wrong, but first time for everything. And Paul and Beckham, don't you dare say anything in the chat saying otherwise. All right. So the back of the book says, Laurel Canyon in the 1960s and early 1970s was a magical place where the dizzying array of musical artists congregated to create much of the music that provided the soundtrack to those turbulent times. Members of bands like The Byrds, The Doors, Buffalo Springfield, The Monkees, The Beach Boys, The Turtles, The Eagles, The Flying Burrito Brothers, Frank Zappa and the Mothers of Invention, Steppenwolf, CSN, Three Dog Night in Love, along with such singer-songwriters as Joni Mitchell, Judy Collins, James Taylor, and Carole King, lived together and jammed together in the, and I don't think I can pronounce that word.
Oh, let me see.
Bucolic community?
Bucolic.
Thank you. Community nestled in the Hollywood Hills. But there was a dark side to that scene as well. Many didn't make it out alive, and many deaths remain shrouded in mystery to this day. Far more integrated into the scene than most would like to admit was a guy by the name of Charles Manson, along with his murderous entourage. Also floating about the periphery were various political operatives, up-and-coming politicians, and intelligence personnel. The same sort of people who gave birth to many of the rock stars populating the canyon, and all the canyon's colorful characters, rock stars, hippies, murderers, and politicos happily coexisted alongside a covert military installation. That was jam-packed.
Yeah.
Based on that description, I would say that's pretty accurate to what the author goes on to discuss in the book. Zach, what do you think?
I'd say that's pretty accurate, yeah. And I think the military installation, he might be putting more into that than he ought to. I've heard such anyway. I've heard that he's making, a mountain out of a molehill with that Lookout Mountain military installation, but I wasn't there.
So the book itself, so it's 315 pages. It doesn't look as big as it is, but it is, it is a pretty big book. So a lot to get through. I personally did not find it an easy read, in the sense that it was so jam-packed that I was only able to read a certain amount at a time, and then I had to put it away because there was just so much in there.
I agree completely. He doesn't know how to he doesn't know how to telegraph his punches skillfully. He just kind of throws everything. And you've read like 18 books in the space of a chapter in terms of how much information it contains.
Mm-hmm. So I'll just kind of start to kind of go through my kind of critiques on it, and Zach, feel free to jump in at any point. And if you're like, Dani, I agree, or you know what, Dani, I disagree, and here's why. All right. So one of the things that really bothers me, and this is just me, when I'm reading a book, is when the author kind of interjects their own statements and their own kind of punctuation at the end of a sentence or a paragraph. And I noticed Ed Sanders did that in The Family for Manson. So for example, the author would read say a paragraph and say like, well, clearly that's what happened, or go on and do another paragraph and be like, here we go again. Like those, I didn't need those extra little statements. I can follow along just fine. So those really
I agree with you, Dani, and he's always doing it. He's like, but I digress again. It seems I've digressed again. And he does it all the time. He's trying to be conversational, but he screws himself because he tries to throw in all this information in a non-conversational way, and it's not very well written.
Yeah. Like early on when he went, like an example of one of the paragraphs I have is, quote, another shining star on the Laurel Canyon scene just a few years later will be singer-songwriter Jackson Browne, who is, are you getting as bored with this as I am? The product of a career military family. Like I didn't need. Didn't need that.
Bad form.
And he does that throughout the entire book. So that is, a little. I could do without. In regards to Manson, because he does reference Manson throughout the entire book, one of the things, and I'm not a Manson supporter in any way, shape, or form. Don't get me wrong. There was a lot of, Manson's homicidal lieutenant Bobby Beausoleil, or Mansonites, things like that, and I'm just like, ugh. But then he goes on to say Laurel Canyonites as well. And I'm like, where are you saying these terms? But little thing. I will say that the beginning of the book, he goes on to introduce a lot, and he jam-packs a lot of successful and influential rock musician superstars who emerged from Laurel Canyon. So that part was very interesting because he doesn't just say the names. He goes on to describe each of them. Some of them have whole chapters dedicated to them. So if people reading this book aren't familiar with the Laurel Canyon scene and who comes from there, I think this is good because you get a lot of names to go through.
Yeah, and like Houdini. I appreciated that chapter later in the book about Houdini, and he makes a reference in the beginning of the book. He's like setting you up. I want to know more about Houdini, but I'm glad he did that. He's doing his best to create a logical structure for his book. It's a little bit crazy. It's a little bit sloppy, but interesting stories. The ones that catch your attention.
Yeah. In regards to when he does describe each of these people, he also goes on to describe their deaths and what the author thinks, in his opinion, actually happened to each of those. I will say, for me, some were a little stretching it. Some were some rumors that had been floating around online that I was kind of already familiar with. Like one of them was Jim Morrison. And I know we've recently had a show where we just talked about that. Cass Elliot is another example of, rumors that we've kind of heard about her death. It does talk about Gary Hinman as well, who is central to the Charles Manson case. Yeah. A lot of other big names. Were there any other names for you of any artists that stood out to you that was discussed in this book, whether you agreed with where the author was going or whether you disagreed, Zach?
Well, there's Rodney Alcala, Houdini, all the 60s people. Tom Mix. Tom Mix is interesting. He's like an early cowboy star kind of character. And I think it's interesting how all the houses keep burning down. That's pretty interesting.
Yeah, that is definitely a tie between a lot of these cases. I do have a quote and this was a little bit of a tie to the Manson case. It was about Diane Linkletter, and then it talks about somebody, so Carol, who was connected to that. There was one quote. I mean, I'm not going to lie, Zach, when I was reading it and I got to this point in the book, I was like, do I continue this book? I mean, obviously I was going to, but I was like, if this is where the author's mind is, Lord help us.
What happened?
Here's my quote. Quote, Carol, alas, perhaps weighed down by her enormous breasts, managed to drown in barely a foot of water, while Mr. Durston promptly disappeared, end quote. I was like, really? Really?
Who are these people?
It was about Diane Linkletter, and it was tying somebody named Carol to that. But I was just like, this is how you're going to explain her drowning?
Yeah,
like it was I couldn't tell if he was being serious or not, but I'm like, I can't believe the author put that in the book.
And he's trying to imply that whoever quickly went away was responsible for the death of Carol.
Yeah, that this was maybe why she died. But it was shocking to read. I was like, there's no way the author just put that. And I had to like reread it. Look at James Watson. That got my attention. I'm sure it did. But that was so early in the book too.
I know he's trying to be as purple and horrible and scandalous as possible. He wants to sell big, right? And that's, if it bleeds, it leads. So he's trying to overdo it. And I feel like there are some interesting stories buried in the muck of that book, but I won't say he's a good writer.
Yeah. So the book goes on to discuss Laurel Canyon, and hi everyone, I see y'all coming in a little later, so welcome. Again, if you are not familiar, we are doing a review of weird scenes inside the canyon. So the author talks about Laurel Canyon, how it was an undeveloped place in LA until about 1913, when Charles Spencer Mann and his partners began buying up a lot of land where it became known as Laurel Canyon Boulevard. And then it would go on to discuss the infamous log cabin. So I will say I was not familiar with Laurel Canyon before it was Laurel Canyon, so to say. So I found that part interesting.
I agree.
So, and if there's anything that I'm missing, Zach, by all means, feel free to jump in. So Harry Houdini, you had mentioned him earlier. He does get discussed earlier in the book in regards to, the author says he was engaged in doing intelligence work for both the U.S. Secret Service and Scotland Yard, and he used his magic act as a cover.
And that's totally true. It's not just him saying that. That's a known fact. Aleister Crowley was also a spy. That's like a long tradition to get somebody as your agent who has a distracting cover, like normal behavior, that you wouldn't think he'd be a spy. That's a long tradition. I think it's interesting that Houdini bore that double life.
I had not heard of that before. Is that written in other books as well?
Sure, Google it. Yeah.
Okay. let's see. In regards to Sunset Boulevard, Sunset Strip, the author describes there was no clubs on Sunset Boulevard. I was about to say that all Boston. That changed around 1964 when clubs began to pop up along the strip. Again, I don't know that history, so I found that part interesting as well.
Yeah, I don't know anything about that either.
There was a lot of comparison about, and I'm totally going to butcher his name, so Zach, please correct me. Vito Paulcast?
I think it's Paulicus. I was saying Paulicus, but I think it's Paulicus.
So there's a lot of comparison to him and Charles Manson. And the main difference that the author gets to is that Vito was non-violent, where Manson was violent.
Mm.
And I didn't know anything about him prior to reading this.
It's weird and interesting, kind of horrifying, and you can't really take him. You got to take it with a grain of salt. But I think he does have a son that died mysteriously, tragically, and those allegations have been made before. So, but
yeah.
so
Capone,
there were a lot of characters in that area with guru and follower kind of motif going on, like the what's that guy Baker, Father Yod. That's a whole other cult that was going on at the same time as the Manson, and he also called it the family. So it's just something that was happening. Doesn't mean it's a plot, but McGowan definitely tries to make it a plot, like a repetition kind of plot thing.
Yeah. And Paul, who is in the chat, should get his butt up on camera, says there was a guru on every corner. Yes, we have studied that before. Yeah, it was a lot more common than I think a lot of history kind of, depending on where you're reading, puts it out there. Capone, the Vito stuff was worth getting the book. It was very interesting.
Interesting, sure.
Except the kid.
Except the weird, yeah, that was really weird. But have you heard that story of passing the kid around? Haven't you heard that in the Manson saga too?
Mm-hmm.
So that's weird. He may just be making that up or something. I don't know. But the kid did die. So that's a tragedy.
So just to give a little bit of a brief, because I do have that note. So I would say if some people don't like listening to that, so turn the volume off for like 10 to 15 seconds if you don't want to hear this. So baby Gadot, yeah, between 3 to 5 years old, had died by falling off the roof of a 2 to 3 story building. But what was horrific for me to read was that they still carried out the night as planned. The parents, they went out dancing. When people asked where the baby was, Vito just said, quote, "He died today," end quote. I don't know, Zach, what was your reaction?
I don't know. That's weird. I guess people were doing that sort of thing at that time in history, trying to be unmovable and true to their whatever, true to their ideal. But yeah, no, I don't agree with that. Vito, you shouldn't have done it.
Yes, agreed. And then later in the book, it gets to like all these different versions of what actually happened, and different people have different versions of what happened, who was there. I don't think we ever really get to what happened, but nonetheless, there was a baby that did die, because and it is referenced.
Yeah, there are like 3 versions.
Yeah, horrible.
He fell through a skylight or something, and supposedly he was on acid or something even.
Yeah, that was one of the things. But then it talks about like the drug tests or that panel that was on, and that was supposedly negative. I don't know. A lot of back and forth.
And I think he's trying to do that. He's just he throws in gossip and stories and shit to keep the reader attentive, and then comes with his new thing about Alcala. And the first time I read it, that seemed out of place at the end.
Yes.
But he's got all these connections to all these other Laurel Canyon people, which kind of makes it belong at the end, because it's a modern example of misdeeds coming out of Laurel Canyon.
Mm-hmm. I
I'll
will
try.
get back to that, Zach,
Yeah,
but I'm spot on in agreement with you that
you
it
got
was
that. You got
great
quotes from that because I can look it up.
for Rodney.
For Rodney's multiple connections to previous Laurel Canyon stuff.
So I researched that case prior to this, and I've actually covered it on a previous episode. And I found that chapter it just didn't really make sense to put it in this book. I thought it was a long stretch for the author to put that in. And a lot of the author's research on Rodney's case itself seemed to really, I really very much actually disagreed with it in regards to how the trial was and the evidence that was presented. I was like, where did the author get this information? It was just bizarre how the author covered that case. But in regards to the author goes so far as to say that Rodney Alcala seems to be the bridge between the Laurel Canyon scene and the brutal world of serial murder. However, when the author gets to saying like the exact way that Rodney Alcala is tied to Laurel Canyon, it was because one of his victims was abducted from basically like the opening of Laurel Canyon. And I was like, what?
But he also has connections to the Roman Polanski went to school with them. Jim Morrison went to school with them. Marlon Brando, I don't remember. Steve Hodel investigated the case. That's interesting. That's the Black Dahlia guy's son.
Mm-hmm.
And then basically it's just iconic places like Ciro's and Chateau Marmont. But that would be anyone in Laurel Canyon would probably have those in their bio.
I did put a lot of stock into that because there wasn't like he went to school with them and was friends with them or hung out with them. So I didn't put a lot of stock in that, but you're right for saying that. Even with Lynette Squeaky from the Manson family, the author says in the book that she was friends with Phil Hartman, the comedian Phil Hartman. They went to the same school, but I have not read anything about them being friends.
They dated. Phil Hartman admits it. They dated.
I've never heard that.
Look for it. It's on YouTube. It's on Google. I mean, God rest.
A lot of stuff is online and on Google, on YouTube, but I will look that up.
No, I've heard Phil Hartman say it himself. It's definitely true.
Okay, I will look that up. I will look that up.
Crazy world.
You know, Zach, if this is an episode where I'm being called out for being wrong, which I'm never wrong. I'm just kidding.
Danny, you're infallible. I'm just a Yahoo. I just got off the train 10 minutes ago. What do I know? They never dated. Look it up, Paul. Yes, they did. Look it up.
I just loved how I just called Paul Danny. That's a compliment, Paul, that I would refer to you as my name.
I'll send you a link. Paulcast. I'll send him a link.
Yeah, I would like to see that as well. I was not familiar with that. If I'm wrong on that, I'm wrong on that. I've not heard anything.
God rest Phil Hartman.
Let's see. James Watson. It's weird that Rodney Alcala and Ron Goldman were both on TV dating shows. I mean, not really related to this book, but I could see where you say that. Yeah, interesting. Paul Lynn would definitely say that is like Mike Love saying they had sex. Oh, God. Ugh, don't need that reference.
What is your problem, Paul? I'll give you a link, man. Settle down. I don't understand. I'm not saying it's a great book. It's just a bunch of weird stories. And what are you saying about Mike Love? That's one of the Beach Boys.
Yeah, Mike Love. We've looked at the Beach Boys in regards to a lot of Dennis Wilson, in regards to the Manson case. So we can, definitely, Zach, send me a link if you have one. We will.
Yeah, and what's Paul talking about? What was the deal with Mike Love and Squeaky Front?
I think he was just kind of the comparison, like that would be like.
No, it's not, but okay. I'll send you a link.
But yeah, I didn't. Paul, no, I'm not mad. It's just everyone says stuff like that. Well,
I'll send you a link.
We'll look into it, Paul. We'll look into it. But yeah, that was something I'd not heard. But yeah, the Rodney Alcala part, I don't know. It just seemed very out of place. But to be fair, the chapter, and I know I'm jumping ahead in the notes here. Zach, what is your thought in regards to the chapter before that? The last chapter talks about punk new wave music arriving. I kind of thought the author should have ended the book before that chapter, because it kind of just went off to like, this is what the Canyon, like, music kind of became. And I just thought it wasn't really, that's not what this was to me.
Well, I was interested to learn all that stuff about Stuart Copeland and how all his relatives had companies called IRS and a band called the Police and some company called CIA. And their father was actually an intelligence operative. I never would have guessed. And that's all true. I looked that up too. I can prove that all too. If anyone's debating any of the truth of any of it, I don't think he lies at all. I think he's just a bad writer.
The author.
Yeah, Dave McGowan.
All right, let's just see here. Mike Love said he had sex with Squeaky at Dennis Wilson's. Then she said that Mike Love's story was made up.
She's probably right.
Everything about Mike Love and Squeaky hooking up makes sense. All right. Yeah, I personally just kind of didn't think that chapter, I just thought it kind of took a sharp left turn in regards to the flow of the Laurel Canyon scene.
I agree. It seems slapped on. It seems just slapped on. Mm-hmm. Let's get more in here. He's got some Laurel Canyon connections. Yeah.
Let's see. Okay, let me jump back quite a bit in the notes here. The author does go on quite a bit to talk about Jim Morrison. Obviously, he was a very central figure, and talks about how he may or may not have died in Paris on July 3rd, 1971. And again, that was something I'd already heard of, and I know we just did a show talking about that.
I asked Mr. X my first question.
Yes,
but
he did.
He may be waiting for an introduction. Like, he may not know he was supposed to answer that. He might be waiting for me to be like, okay, Frank, I want to ask you some questions. And so maybe I'll just restate it. But he accepted my friend request. I'm on my way to see the Cassidys. And I was like, well, I'm going to see Neil Cassidy, see if I can publish Neil Cassidy. What do you think of Neil Cassidy? He didn't answer, but he might not have known it was the official interview. Or he might just not want to answer.
Interesting.
But I'm pretty sure he looks a lot like him.
Yeah, keep me posted on that. I'm very interested.
For sure.
And regards to, again, the author goes into quite a bit of detail about other celebrity deaths and kind of how, what's been reported versus what the author thinks may or may not have actually happened. Let's see. Let me go back. Okay. I will say, everybody knows that my favorite band is the Monkees, and Mickey Dolenz is my celebrity crush of all time. And the book talks a lot about the Monkees, particularly Mickey Dolenz, Peter Tork, and a little bit of Michael Nesmith. I don't think mentions Davy Jones once, to be honest, but that's all right. But they were key figures in Laurel Canyon.
And Peter Tork is so much cooler than I ever thought I knew. Peter Tork was a total badass in Laurel Canyon, everyone hanging out with him, Buffalo, Springfield hanging out, and, the whole crowd.
Yeah, he didn't get, I don't think, the credit that he should have in the Monkees.
Oh yeah. And they don't seem to come off blamed as anything more than show business, like nepotism kids in show business. So that's good. They weren't part of the CIA mind control game. If there was such a game.
Mike was the brains of the outfit. I mean, he was the real pretty much, I mean, him and Peter were the only real musicians that went into that. But before I go fully into the monkeys on that,
Can I tell you, you probably know this. Paul will doubt it though, but Mike Nesmith's mother invented liquid paper. Look it up.
She did.
She did.
She did. I will sign that check. She sure did. It was interesting because the monkeys do get a bad rap, and the author does talk about that in this book because it's, you know, kind of like, oh, well, they weren't really a real band. But then the author goes on to list a whole bunch of celebrities, including a lot of people from the Laurel Canyon scene that tried out for it and didn't make the cut.
Yeah. Even Stephen Stills, as I remember.
I knew that. So one of the quotes, oh my God. All right, Zach. So this one made me really mad because, let's see. It talks about celebrities who auditioned for the Monkees, but weren't cast. And then, but the author does say one of the people that did not try out for it because he was in jail was Charles Manson. But the author goes on to say, quote, and that's kind of a shame when you think about it, because if he had been, we might remember Charlie Manson, one of America's most notorious criminals, but rather as the guy who made Marsha Brady scream. I was like, what the hell?
I kind of like that.
I would not.
Why not? Why not?
Because Davey, it just, I don't know. I just thought that was a lot.
It couldn't have been anyone but Davey. You're saying. Apologize for talking over you.
No.
What did you just say?
It was, I thought it was just it was a very far stretch of a comment that made. It was just,
well, yeah, it's sort of like, we can play with the Monkees. They are just a fake band. We can do that. Kind of that attitude, you know? Mm-hmm. And to you, you're probably like, it had to be Davey. That's who it is. It's Davey. And they don't even mention him.
But also there were, I mean, to give credit where credit is due, there were a lot of other celebrities who auditioned that had a lot of talent I'm like, okay, I could see them being cast. Like, Charlie wasn't the kind of bubblegum pop person to put into that.
That's
position.
True. That's true. It's just, that's been a rumor for a long time. Haven't you ever heard that rumor that Charles Manson was one of the people who tried out for the Monkees? I remember hearing that in elementary school. I mean, it's not true, but that's been a rumor for a long time.
What is this? It's okay. Lots of men talk over Dani. Lots, so many. James Watson, I'm going to time you out if you keep it up.
I just got off a train, Watson. I'm usually so gentlemanly and so deferential when it comes to Dani. I'm just feeling my oats.
No, so for those who don't follow Zach on Instagram, he has been posting about his whole trip. So yeah, he literally just got back from his trip. So props for being here.
Yeah, wait till I write the short story. I wouldn't have missed it for the world.
Okay, so all right, another part. So Frank Zappa is a very central part of this book and is tied into a lot, which makes sense because he is such a key figure of the Laurel Canyon scene. So were you familiar, Zach? Because I put this note because I was not familiar with Augustus. I'm totally going to butcher this name. Augustus Owsley Stanley III, the son of someone who served as a military officer during World War II. He produced approximately, okay, so you already know. I didn't. Produced about 4 million tabs of pure LSD in the 1960s. Then him and the Grateful Dead. He was the band's financial backer, sound engineer. In 1967, he unleashed a particularly nasty hallucinogen known as STP. I
don't know if he's really responsible for STP. And sorry for talking over you.
No, go ahead.
I've never heard him associated with anything but LSD.
So well, the author says.
I know.
Just putting that out there. Yeah, and it said it was extensively tested at Frank Zappa's former home. So that was
Yeah, that might be the case. I'll have to do some independent research. I always thought he was. They call him Bear. I always thought he was just the LSD guy.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe.
Yeah, in let's see. It says, and the author's connection to this was he was using STP as a possible biowarfare agent before it was being distributed to hippies as a recreational drug, and then in 1970 he began serving time after conviction of drug charges.
They say Owsley was using it as a chemical warfare agent.
It says a possible biowarfare agent.
Oh, that Owsley was using it as such, or just that's what it is?
That it was being extensively tested at Frank Zappa's former home as a possible biowarfare agent before being distributed to hippies.
That's weird. I missed that part. But Frank Zappa's parents were involved in chemical warfare, so maybe he's just stretching it and being like, and Zappa too was testing biowarfare. I don't know.
Yeah, there was a bit of that theme. Let's see. So what is Little Milky says STP is something a psychotic biker would think of.
It's true.
I don't know the mechanic. Oh, okay, Paul. History. STP was the first synthesized and tested in 1963. All right. Zappa hated drugs. Yes, he did.
Yes, he did.
Yep. And I don't have my Zappa book with me. I lent it to Liz when I saw her this week, so I can't even pull it up and say, see, check out this book. It's a great Zappa book.
Nice looking, too.
All right. But yeah, there's anybody who likes Zappa, I would say, there's a lot of books on him. He is a central part of this book being, he's weaved in and out throughout it. So if you want to kind of maybe a bit of a different take on Zappa, you do get that here. A lot of people are saying a bunch about Zappa in the chat. Okay. The GTOs were doped up to make pennies. They were very much on drugs.
It's weird that Zappa, as far as I've heard, I wasn't there, but he's very against drugs, but he apparently supposedly likes to get people high and make sure they all have drugs, but he's very against drugs, almost like he's just kind of playing with people. Maybe, I don't know.
I didn't take it quite like that. Who's the author? Pauline Butcher's book. She very much kind of describes him as a control freak. So I don't think it was more so distributing it to other people in that end.
No, not distributing, but he would just encourage drug use. If you want to use, go ahead, kind of thing. But that could have just been the times.
Paul, no, he wouldn't have them in his house. People would sneak them behind his back.
I don't know. I'm not a Zappa fan.
Let's see. The book talks a lot about the Lucifer Rising project in regards to Bobby Beausoleil. Again, the author uses the term Mansonite quite frequently during this book.
And isn't that a kind of a stone, like a man-made stone? Mansonite, or maybe that's Masonite.
I don't read that in a lot of Manson literature books, to be honest.
No, just Sanders and McGowan.
Yeah. So Paul says, so we did interview Pauline Butcher. We had her on the Manson saga, and that was one of the things that she did. Yeah, that's correct, Paul. That she did say about that. In regards to going off of the topic of Zappa, unless there's something else that I missed, Zach, that you want to...
No, I don't know. I don't know from Zappa, really.
Okay.
So I'll concede anything.
In regards to... I noticed... Okay, so I made a note here, and I noticed the author did this kind of... It was consistent throughout the book, but as the book got on, it became more and more and I wish Liz could make it tonight. She was on the fence about being able to make it, but she made this comment to me too when we did meet earlier this week. Was the author would frequently start to talk about one person, but then would kind of trail off into
That's
connecting
true.
them to somebody else, and then to somebody else, to somebody else, and then
And he
you're
goes, "Oh,
several pages in, then the author's like, well, let's get back.
Yeah.
Which, not a good writing style.
No.
Not a good writing style. Yeah. All right. So I'm glad that, you agree with that too. I also found the structure not very good in the book in regards to, I felt like the author would, at one hand, like you said earlier, talk about Houdini at one part earlier in the book, and then bring it up later. And he did that with a lot of people. And some of the stuff he would say at one point, it was repetitive later on. And I just felt that was a little unnecessary, where it could have just been, which would have made the book shorter, but I think would have made it structure-wise flow a bit better.
I think he should have maybe have written it as though it were an English thesis or like a psychological thesis, and very straightforwardly and just go through it. But no, he digresses. And I guess, he found some comfort in that style and he just did it. But I guess he probably didn't make a lot of money.
Yeah.
Maybe it was a brief sales hit, I'm not sure.
In regards to, all right, so Phil Hartman, I know we talked about him a little earlier in regards to his connection to Lynette Squeaky Fromme. The author goes on to say there's a strong possibility that in regards to the murder-suicide, that was a cover-up for what really happened.
Yeah, I don't know. I think it was Andy Dick's fault. Because
he did get his wife back on drugs, but
yeah, and supposedly she was like clean and had kicked in and was triumphant, and Andy Dick's like, I've got to know. So yeah, and John Lovitz kicked his ass over it. Did you hear that?
No.
John Lovitz, I don't know where, but some important place like the walkway leading to the Emmys or something. John Lovitz like beats up Andy Dick for doing that. And Andy Dickson, kind of an interesting, tragic figure. I guess he's probably still alive. But I saw him on a podcast. There's a guy named Matan. Has anyone heard of Matan? Look for Matan, Andy Dick. It's sadistic. But Andy Dick is like a drunk, and he doesn't really know what's real and what's not. And this guy Matan has the whole studio rigged up with like somebody's head coming out of the table, somebody under the table, like pushing things at him. Andy Dick doesn't really know what's real. And it's cruel and inhuman, but interesting.
Yeah, that does not surprise me. That does not surprise me. So let's see. The book goes on to talk a lot about, again, this is another musical band that was woven throughout a lot of the book, is the Mamas and the Papas, in regards to, John Phillips, Michelle Phillips, Mama Cass. I will say, the author slut shames Michelle Phillips.
He does.
Really hard.
It's true.
Which to me was very unfair. And I'm not just saying that because, I'm a girl, that's another girl, but think of the times that the times that we were in back then. It was very much, I want to say, no different from what the culture was at that time. So
that's true. Yes.
Again, I was not there, but
it was de rigueur. You're right.
It was just, if you're going to slut shame one, then slut shame everyone. Like, let's just be fair. I don't know. I didn't like that part, but
I agree. But John Phillips seems to be a real creepy guy, though, doesn't he?
I mean, well, Zach, that's an understatement.
As presented in this book, anyway. But I kind of thought so too.
I have not read Mackenzie Phillips' book. I am familiar with it. I have not read it. So a lot of the author does bring in some of the accusations that Mackenzie made, and the author describes, like goes into a little bit of detail. Again, that was nothing new to me. Yeah. Okay. All right, Paul. I think we're all in agreement on this. Yeah, he was not.
I'd like to interview Mackenzie Phillips. I think she's my Instagram friend. I asked her a couple times, hasn't said yes yet. I would ask her all about the Laurel Canyon scene when she was growing up, without asking leading questions. Just how was it growing up in the Laurel Canyon scene?
Mm-hmm.
Someday.
I'm sure she has a lot of stories, but then again, she might not remember a lot.
Probably doesn't want to talk about anything but what she's got on her list of things to talk about.
Yeah.
Trying.
Yeah. And again, I have not read her book. I'm familiar with it, but the author does reference that. But yeah, John is not, not a good figure there. Let's see. The author talks about River Phoenix's death. And all right, this part I did take issue with the author saying, let's say on page 226, that River Phoenix, quote, died under mysterious circumstances at the tender age of 23 outside the Viper Room, very near the mouth of Laurel Canyon on Halloween night, 1993, end quote.
Yeah, that's pretty lame.
Like, all right, come on. Yeah, it was just, I'm like, all right, another stretch. But again, it's just, there was a lot of instances of that.
He's a bad faith writer.
Sorry, what was that, Zach?
A bad faith writer. Bad faith actor.
It's like, but to be honest, like, I'm not against in regards to if an author's like, here's my research and here's where I'm going with this. I might not agree, but I can take a step back and read the book for what it's worth. It's when you, as an author, put things in there that are very easily discreditable, then it can discredit a lot of the other things you're saying. And as a reader, for some of the things I have not researched, so I can't say for sure, like, this theory that he has is BS or not. I don't know. But when there's somewhere I'm like, that's a provable one, then it just kind of muddies the water for everything else, which is unfortunate as a reader. And if I'm being too harsh on that, Zach, please correct me.
No, I agree. Whoa, shit.
Whoa, what just happened?
Hold on.
Technical difficulties.
I agree, though. Can you hear me still?
Yes. Yeah, your camera shifted.
Yeah, I'm not sure what the hell. I'm trying to fix it, but I think that, I think something might have come unplugged, maybe. Hold on.
Okay. Well, while Zach is figuring that out.
Wait, what? Man, I'm confused.
Do you want me to take you off camera while you do that? Okay. Never mind. So he did. All right. We will bring Zach back up when he gets that taken care of. But yeah, as a reader, again, I always try to take a step back and give your camera and mic are still on. Give the benefit of the doubt of, again, I might not follow this and not agree with everything the author's saying, but I'll read it and give it that benefit of the doubt. But there was just a lot of things that muddied the water for me, that it just right off the bat discredits a lot of the things that the author said. That's my take on it. I know I typically I try not to give, I'm not like somebody that would come on and bash an author. That's not my thing. But with that being said, this was a book that was voted on for book club, and I want to be honest. There have been books where it's been suggested to me, or I'm like, oh, this looks like a good book, and I get it and I read it and I'm like, not so much. And I just put it on the shelf and I don't talk about it on camera because I don't want to come on and like completely bash an author. That's not my scene. But this book was, for me, a difficult read. It was the author, the structure wise wasn't very good. There was a lot of just, it was all over the place in regards to the subject that the author would be describing. in regards to, again, like me and Zach, that he agreed with earlier, was the author would say, you know, we talk about one particular celebrity and then he would link them to somebody else and then that person to somebody else. And we'd be so far removed that we'd be maybe 5-10 pages later. And then the author would say, all right, now let's bring it back. And it's like, wait, what? Like, what are you doing? A lot of the things were a bit of a stretch in regards to the theories that the author had or how they were connected to Laurel Canyon. There were some celebrities and figures that were very central to that. And that makes sense to talk about them in this book. But there were quite a few where it was really a stretch to get them tied to the scene. And in the author's own words, it was kind of, well, they were tied by this, and it's like, well, then no, they're kind of really not. Again, like River Phoenix's death, Phil Hartman's death. And again, the Rodney Alcala, tying that in, I'm like, that, no. And the author's research on that case, being somebody where true crime is my thing, and I've studied that case before, and I'm like, I don't know where the author got a lot of the details that they did on that case, but that's just me. So would I recommend this book? Paul, yes, I will read your statement. Let me finish mine. Thank you. Would I recommend this book? I would not, for the reasons that I stated. However, if there is somebody that is, you know, somebody might be watching this and have a takeaway of, well, you know what, the things that you didn't care for in this book are things that actually do interest me with the Laurel Canyon scene. And great. Maybe this book would be more up someone's alley. Thank you, Tony Stewart. Thank you. You know what? I'm giving you, I don't want to do more stars than the StreamYards link, so I'm giving you 5 stars tonight, Tony Stewart. But yeah, it's, you know, there were the history of the canyon, of Laurel Canyon in that scene. I liked reading about that. I will give the book that. If people are unfamiliar with the Laurel Canyon scene and who was involved, there are so many names in this book that I think if somebody were to get this book, then it would be a good starting point of taking those names and learning all of those figures and then doing your own research from there on each of those people, and not necessarily just arriving at some of the conclusions that the author does in regards to maybe some of the conspiracies and, you know, what the author says is kind of misinformation about their deaths and whatnot. I will give that. But yeah, that's kind of my overall take on the book. Zach is still trying to get connected. When he does get reconnected, I will bring him back on. That is the nice Paul. I'm just trying to be completely fair. And again, that's just my take on it. So with that being said, Paul, who doesn't want to be on camera, but ordinarily I'd be like, get your butt up here and do it yourself. But this has been a book that Paul and both Beckham read quite a while ago when we were researching the case, the Manson case, over on Manson Saga discussion panel. So this was a book that we talked about well before. So where Paul was not able to be on camera tonight, I'm like, you know what, I'm fine reading your notes on it. So the takeaway that Paul had from this, and again, if you are not familiar with who Paul is, my co-host over on Manson Saga discussion panel on the Paulcast, me and Mr. Beckham have been doing that for quite a while now. So if you're not familiar with that channel, go on over there. So what Paul's takeaway was lack of sourcing and citations, specifically no footnotes or proper references. For example, McGowan makes sweeping claims about musicians' backgrounds, family military connections, and alleged intelligence ties without providing reliable sources. Reliance of innuendo instead of concrete proof. He often uses suggestive language. Like, for example, quote, isn't it curious that, end quote, to build connections. I do agree with that, Paul. Another point that Paul made, guilt by association fallacy. Paul's takeaway on that was he suggests that because many Laurel Canyon musicians had relatives in the military or intelligence agencies, they themselves were somehow involved in covert operations. This is a classic logical fallacy. And the example that Paul says is just because Jim Morrison's father was a Navy admiral doesn't mean Jim was part of a, oh my God, I can't even pronounce that word, Paul, of a psyop? Psychop? Oh my God. Sorry, Paul. Can't pronounce that. I do agree with that. There are, and we have to think back to the times of where the military was at that time very prominent. So it would make sense that there were, if there were a lot of military, I don't want to use the wrong term, but people in the, that working for military agents. I know. I cannot pronounce tonight. I just really can't. Or any night, to be honest. Let's just be fair. But it would make sense if there were a lot of, military involved parents and then they had kids. That does not necessarily mean that all of those children would then be involved in that. But the author, instead of even giving the possibility that not all children that were raised by military parents would have been in that, it's just the sweeping claim of like, well, their parent was in the Navy, so therefore their father was, in an intelligence agency, therefore it's 100%. There's no in the middle. It's black or white. That, and the author doesn't even give the option that there'd be nobody in that. Yeah, military brats. It's just, if your parent, no, Tony Stewart. I had a long day. I did a volunteer doing cat adoptions today. Very long day. Maybe. But yeah, it wasn't even, it was just, if somebody's parent was in the military, they're automatically tied to being, in that circle. And it can't be all or nothing. And again, the author is not even the nothing. It's everybody's all in. So I do agree with that, Paul. The third point, and Paul has already referenced that quite a bit in this chat as the show has gone on with this book, is historical inaccuracy. Some timelines are off or distorted to fit his narrative. A little more specific example, Paul said he downplays or ignores well-documented cultural and personal factors that led to the counterculture movement, suggesting it was mostly manufactured. Point 4 that Paul had, conspiracy logic. McGowan's logic often mirrors that of conspiracy theorists in general. Any counter evidence is either part of the cover-up or ignored. A little bit more insight. Paul states he provides very little room for alternative interpretations of events. Everything must fit into that, and then that word I can't pronounce, framework. I do agree with that, and we have discussed some examples as the book review went on of, again, it is very much an all or nothing. No worries. I figured you were having some extreme technical difficulty. So no worries, Zach. No worries at all. Right. See, the next point that Paul had with this book, and Beckham, if you are still in the chat, I know Beckham during the True Crime and Chill made it very clear that WrestleMania, I think, is tonight, so that he'd be watching that. But Beckham, by all means, if you are still listening, which I don't think you are, feel free to weigh in as well, because I know you read this book. I hadn't read this book. Both of my co-hosts read this book. So, all right. Again, the other point that Paul had for a review of this book was cherry picking and selective analysis. Paul said the author cherry picks details that seem suspicious while ignoring mundane explanations. And the example that Paul provided was the Laurel Canyon area was full of artists and bohemians long before the 60s music scene exploded, which he largely overlooks. Correct. You are correct in that. And it's weird because the author goes to give an a background about how the Laurel Canyon scene became the Laurel Canyon in regards to how property was purchased and then was built. But yeah, it leaves that part out. So I do agree with that. How many points do you have, Paul, that you messaged me? My goodness. All right, a few more. Overemphasis in coincidence. Paul says the book relies heavily on the idea that coincidences aren't just coincidences. I completely agree with that. And I've given examples tonight in the review of that. Specifically, Paul's example was he presents things like physical proximity, who lived near whom, as evidence of coordination when it could easily be due to shared lifestyle, career, or scene. 100%, 100% on that. Another note that you had was no expert corroboration. McGowan wasn't a historian or trained journalist, and he didn't consult experts in music history, intelligence, or military affairs. The author does say that. The author does say that in the book. There are parts where he will say, which I found, it's funny that you said that, Paul, because I didn't even put that in my notes. So I'm really glad you said that. Was there'd be times when the author would make claims about, a certain celebrity or tie to, trying to say they were in the military or, whatever example he was giving, but then say, well, I didn't really research this part, or I didn't really research that aspect. And there was a few examples of that in the book. And again, it's stuff like that muddies the water for everything else. And it's so, as a reader, it's very frustrating for that. So I'm really glad you said that, because I completely forgot that the author did do that at several points. And it's like, okay, so you're going on explaining these points you're trying to make, and then, oh, well, I actually didn't really research that. And it's like, wait, what? All right. Lacks peer review or support from credible researchers in the fields he critiques. All right. Tone and style. Okay, this is one of the key things that I took away from this. I know when Zach was on, we talked about that. And that's one of the things that when I met up with Liz this week and we were talking, because she purchased this book and was reading it alongside as well, the tone and style. The writing is often sarcastic and mocking, which undermines any objective reading. I completely agree. His tone can make it hard to separate serious claims from satire. Or hyperbole, absolutely. Like the drowning in an inch of water, even though, Carol had enormous breasts. Like, I was shocked that was in the book. And that was so early on. I was like, what the hell am I going to be reading? I can't believe the author put that in there. Like, again, what were they trying to be funny or not? I don't know. Or was he trying to say, funny how she could have drowned like that? Conspiracy. I don't know. But either way, it was just like not good. And even in the intro to the book, the author, I'm just going off Paul's point here, the author says, like, and it's almost in a very a brash way, like, I already know that most won't like this. And it's like, you're already, as a reader, I'm like, I feel like you're yelling at me as a reader, being like, you're not going to believe this anyway, so whatever. And it's like, give me the benefit of the doubt. I can be a very objective reader and take a step back, and I might look at it and be like, I don't agree at the end of the day, but like to come at you or to come at the reader in a very harsh way at the beginning, I didn't care for that. So yeah, Paul, I do agree with that. All right. So another point that Paul had was misrepresentation of people. Some musicians and public figures are described in ways that are unflattering, speculative, or even definitive without substantiation. I do agree with that. This includes alleging hidden motives or secret lies without giving the accused a voice or rebuttal. Yeah. And I mean, I know one of the examples that I gave was in regards to, Michelle Phillips. Like, he very much slut shames her really hard during this book throughout. And I'm just like, what? Like, you're describing this kind of other women in regards to this time where that was the culture, and you're not describing that woman in that way. So which makes me think, like, what does the author have against Michelle. I don't know, but it was just, again, I would say very unflattering, but that's just one of the examples that I'm giving, but the author does do that with some others. I'm not putting that on camera, Paul. Confirmation bias. Paul's note was author McGowan starts with the conclusion that the hippie scene was a CIA operation. Yes, the author does do that, and then works backwards. Paul felt only selecting evidence that supports it. Again, I would say some of the points that the author makes is even stretching it to prove that point. But you're right. The author does right away. The author, David McGowan, right away says, this is the conclusion. There was a CIA operation that was happening, and then does work backwards. I will say that. And that is part of that opening statement that it should be right starred. Let me copy and put it back in the chat. While you're getting linked back in, Zach, I'm just going to finish Paul's notes. So if you're backstage for a second, that's why. Just so I don't lose my place. Yeah, and the author does say that in his opening where that's part of where I just mentioned where the author kind of, I felt like very much yells at the reader in regards to, y'all aren't going to like this. A lot of you aren't going to support, and here's why. And it's like, ugh. So Paul's final thoughts. All right. This book is, oh my God, Paul. Okay, Paul, I'm not reading some of that. There was, I will rephrase it, Paul, your last part in regards to Dani friendly. There were some rambling, incoherent responses. Yeah, I will leave that. Paul, if you want to read that last point, you can come on. But I think the points that you made, no, because I don't author bash. And Paul, you can post it in the chat. You can post it in the chat. But basically, Paul's takeaway is that he did not like the book. But you can post it. You can post your final thought. All right. We have Zach back. And Zach with his hat. Hear me. You there, Zach?
Yeah, I'm hearing dialogue from a few minutes ago for some reason. I guess maybe this maybe I just had to close the YouTube. So everything's fine and I'm back.
Okay. Zach is back without the hat.
Yeah, I had to figure out what the hell came loose and where did it go, and it started making this funny sound, and then I just kind of jiggled it, and everything's better.
All right. Well, I'm glad you're back. I gave just my final recap of what I felt about the book. I read Paul's thoughts. Okay, so I want to make sure that I know you were the one that had suggested this book and then it was voted upon. Was there any points that we didn't talk about in this book that you wanted to touch upon? And then I also, after that, want you to give your takeaway on the book as well.
Well, I think it's interesting to realize or remember that entertainers have sort of always been at the behest of the ruling powers. Back to the Middle Ages, and like the famous songs of the time would be praise and tribute to the king, that kind of thing. I don't think that tradition has ever significantly altered in even America after all this time. But I'm not saying it's an evil mind control plot. I think it's just kind of the way things have always been. And in America, we've learned to forget that that's how things in society usually work. Mm-hmm. And that, notwithstanding all the bullshit and all the problems with this book, I think that's a good reminder. And some may not wish to agree, but I mean, that seems to be what I've come to. about the structure of society over the millennia. And I think it's a good thing to remain cognizant of, because then, like, you're in charge of your creativity. It doesn't have to depend on fame, doesn't have to depend on, great release, like contacting a whole lot of people. Just love what you're doing and make great art, writing or music or whatever you're doing, and don't worry about fame. That's I think the unspoken sentiment of this book.
Well said. Well said. Yeah, would you recommend this book?
I would recommend it to someone who wanted to read a weird book full of a lot of weird stories. I wouldn't recommend it as a well-written book or like the truth. I'm not even after the truth myself. I don't think it's about truth or proof. Really, it's about experience and the quality of enjoyment or not in your experience. I think that's what we should be caring about more than proving a truth.
Mm-hmm.
But, a lot of people are after that proof, that truth. So you might read that book and think, wait, where's the proof? Where's the truth? But if you're just interested in a lot of weird stories, I'd say, sure, read that book, but don't take it too seriously. The author's definitely got an agenda, and, it's transparently the case that he's got an agenda, but, you might enjoy it.
Yeah.
I wouldn't be like, you've got to read it. You've got to read this one. Never would do that. And I put off reading it for a long time. The first time I read it, I thought, wow, this guy's just manic paranoia, like to the max. And I put it off for years and years, and I just thought it'd be a good thing to propose for the Dani After Dark book club, because it has so many crossovers into the true crime and murder field.
It absolutely does. It absolutely does. I give my thoughts on those connections, but you're right. It does have those crossover ties to kind of a true crime channel. And again, I very much thank you for suggesting this book, and for people who voted for this. Again, I want this book club to be something where everybody can have an input. I have a Google Doc where I'm keeping track of the book recommendations that are coming in. And, maybe there's, 1 month where you're like, oh, gee, I loved that book review. I want to go get this book now. Or maybe there's another month where you're like, you know what, that wasn't for me. But make recommendations. And this goes for everybody, so that going forward, and everybody can vote on it. And maybe the book that I'm talking to just you as the audience, suggest would be what is selected. So, and one of the good things about this book club, review is this is our honest take on it. And some of the times, what one person might take from it is totally different than what another person might take. And that's okay. And we can talk about that. Any final points on the book, Zach, before we wrap up for tonight?
Well, it's a weird book. I wonder what else this guy might have written. I'm going to look into it. Maybe he's got like a whole bunch of books, and maybe there's a secret indicator of what his particular mania is, and why did he write this book so maniacally. Worth checking into. And no, thanks for having me, Dani, and I'm glad people were interested in reading it, and I hope I didn't cause too much of a stir.
No. All right. There was a part, I'm like, I swear the author mentioned something. He does have other books. Some of them, and I'll just quickly read them, the names that he puts at the very end about the author. So it says McGowan's previous books include Program to Kill, The Politics of Serial Murder and Understanding the F Word, American Fascism and the Politics of Illusion. That kind of sounds pretty on par with...
It does.
Yeah. Right. Well, if you read that book, Zach, or if anybody else has read that book, let me know your thoughts on it. It seems pretty... Yeah, I would believe that that's another book from the author. So
I wonder if it's written in the same herky-jerky style.
I would be interested in that.
You may not have had enough to play
I have
with.
so much of a structure I can take, and I'm like, I can't go and do another book knowing, yeah. But
No, I hear
yeah,
you.
if anybody's read it, let me know. Let us know. All right, everyone. Well, thank you for joining us for another episode of Dani After Dark for the book club. I know we did it a bit early this month. And thank you, Zach, for the book recommendation. Next month, we'll be back to the kind of regular format. We'll be at the end of the month. Just this month, it was very chaotic for me at the end of the month, and I just was not able to do that. So in a week or so, I will put up a poll in the book club Facebook group. So if you are not in that, it's the Dani After Dark book club Facebook group. Please join that. And I will put up a poll of several recommendations, and we will vote for next month's book. So until then, everybody, again, thank you for joining us. And remember, until next time, we don't live in darkness. Darkness lives in us. Bye, everyone.